Letting your fingers dangle. Feel your fingers, let them dangle, become longer. Under their own weight, let them be pulled longer. Become aware of your fingers as a collection of joints. And your hands and wrists as a collection of joints and spaces in those joints. And let the shoulders be pulled down naturally by the weight of the arms and hands. Allow the shoulder joints to be gently coaxed open just by the natural weight of the arms and hands. Consciously settle the mind in the belly and notice the belly being able to let go and release just by the presence of the mind in the belly. Bring your presence to your lower back and let that replace physical effort. Let your conscious presence in the lower back replace the efforting in the lower back. Let your breath fill the abdomen. Let your presence in your feet replace the efforting in the feet. Moving your presence into the neck, replacing the tension in the neck. Moving your awareness to the eyes and around the eyes, replacing all the little tensions in and around the eyes. So let all those spaces get filled with presence rather than no space, all the space being squeezed out by tension and holding. That space is open and filled with presence. Sliding your awareness into the jaw hinge and the muscles of the jaw, and let that holding release as it's replaced by presence. Flowing your presence to the crown of the head, let that release any tension holdings there. And letting your presence start to invade and fill more and more of the body, replacing those areas, replacing those new territories with openness and presence. The energeticness of presence. So just like a drop of ink sopping into paper and spreading out, let your presence sink into your tissues and spread out through the tissues into the joints, just like ink dropping into blotting paper. Replacing holding, tightness, constriction, replacing that with this spreading openness. This invading presence. And gently rock out. Become aware of your hands. And so work with a similar process. I'll start with the hands and then bring that through the rest of the body as well. So even on just a physical level, physical basis, we'll do some comparisons and contrasting. So first have your hands out and just dead and limp. Dead and limp. So that's not it, obviously. Then we'll go, in terms of contrasting, go to the other extreme. Open is good. We know open is good, but tight, effort, muscularly pushing everything open. Let's go back to dead and limp. Nothing in there. Stagnant energy. Tight, rigid, brittle. So somewhere in between, where there's space in the hands. So here is no space. It's collapsed. Limp and dead. Here, physically, there's space. Palms are open, space between the fingers. So physically, there's space there, but at the cost of being very rigid and tight and constrained. So space in the hands to avoid being dead and limp. Space in the hands, but not to the point that it's brittle. Again, we can use quality and feeling of presence, placing your presence in your hand. If your presence is in your hand, you're not going to be closed. And if you have your presence in your hands, that's not rigid and brittle. So just your presence in your hands. In terms of more physical, we want space. Space between the fingers, space in the palm, so that's closed. So just on a physical level, I want space, it's closed, fingers, I want space, but not, so that's getting away from dead and collapsed. So we want space, but not doing it in a tight, muscular way, but we want space. So just the intention, just the presence. So feel the openness of that. We don't have to be efforting. It's just placing your intention, placing your presence. And feel the openness of the hands compared to dead, compared to tight and restrictive. Feel the alive quality in your hands, the alive spaciousness. And whatever sensations that you can sense as those good things that are now in your hands, where they're not there here, and they're not in the hands with this, but spaciously open without efforting. If there's any efforting, it's just placing your intention, using your mind, not physically efforting. So feel qualities that feel good, what that feels like. Then move and transfer that feeling into your wrist joints. It's a nice feeling you have in your hands now. Slide that into your wrist joints and let that invade the wrist joints and occupy the wrist joints. And maybe notice, in contrast, what was there before. Either your wrist joints were either dead and collapsed or tightly holding on. So now that's replaced by the same gentle presence, same gentle openness in your hands. It's now expanded to invade the wrist joints. And slide that quality, that presence, that openness, gentle openness into your elbow joints. Slide that feeling into your shoulder joints. And notice what changes physically and energetically. So more space to breathe in the shoulder joints. So the shoulder nest is more open. Under the shoulder is more open. more space to breathe in there. And take that feeling into your chest and notice what happens to the chest when you slide that feeling into the chest area. And move that quality and feeling into your neck, throat. Let the throat open, be more spacious. Gently but actively open. So this is open but too aggressive and too much efforting. It's gently, actively. It's active, but not tight. Actively, it's active, engaged, open, but no striving in the throat. And then to the vertebrae of the neck. Let the vertebrae open and breathe. And right where the spine meets the base of the skull, let that be like the hands in terms of shape and in terms of quality, in terms of feeling. There's a space for presence. Right where the spine and the skull intersect. Then move that feeling to the crown of the head. Let that open and release, become bigger, more spacious, more surface area to greet the sky. Every once in a while, some releasing breaths. Then have that work down through the spine, more space in the spine, more space between the vertebrae, just like the hands. So we don't want this, and we don't want that. If we just invade that area with our presence, we're just nicely in the middle. Things are actively open, energetically alive and open, not brittly open and tight. So allow that feeling to move through the spine. You can even transfer the feeling directly from the hands to that area. Now move to your feet and have the same feeling that's in your hands. Translate that and transfer that to the feet. And notice how the feet change physically and in terms of feeling. The different state of your feet now. Letting presence enter and open the feet. Just stimulatingly open. Just actively open, not aggressively open. Notice the feet, how they've changed in their shape and quality. Breathe, release. Slide that feeling into your ankles, ankle joints. And move that feeling into your knees. And notice what happens to and for the knees. Not holding on in the knees, not artificially trying to change them in the other direction, just feeling it with presence. Softly open, but actively open in the knees. And then deep in the hip joints, deep in the ball joints. See how that changes things there. And then do the best you can to have that globally. So this pervasive overall quality of actively open. Let's contrast. Let everything droop, limp, a deadening, no vibrancy. Contrast the other way. Oh, I'm supposed to be open. It's supposed to be big and spacious. Aggressively. And then let everything settle somewhere in the middle there. Let the breath invade the entire body. That will help you soften and make it a more alive, organic middle place rather than just kind of turning the dimmer down and kind of subsiding. We turn down the stretch and the exertion, but the energy is still there. The energy of this, let's try this. Expand, stretch, aggressively. It's stretching so much, it's too tight, it's too brittle. Now, the one thing about this is it's energized, right? It's energized, but it's wasting energy. The energy is both stuck and also wasting away. It's being drained away, wasting energy. Because the energy that we're generating, we're also using up as fast as we're generating it. But notice the energy that's in this state. It's very energetic in a sense, but way too tight. But notice the energy of this. Now soften the tissues, but keep the energy turned on. Soften the tissues, but let the energy remain. Let the energy pervade. And find a place where you can kind of stay with for a while. Or if you're doing too much physically, it's tiring. If you're doing too much mentally, it's tiring. Find a place where you can adjust it, adjust the thermostat, where there's more energy flowing, but not too much, because again, you'll get tired very quickly. You can't sustain it. Now that will, you'll be able to develop that stamina, your ability to sustain it, that will develop. But if we try to push to that limit too much too soon, we just get tired. And it's very frustrating and exhausting. So we won't want to do it again. So you work that dimmer switch just so you don't get tired too quick. So there's a place where it becomes more and more sustaining and eventually very self-sustaining. So try exaggerating again, where you go big, tight, aggressively big, spreading out. We can't maintain that. So dim the switch slightly physically, energetically, more physically, a little bit energetically, but dim it greatly physically. So what's left more is the energetic is still radiating, energetic is still active, and the physicality, the tissues have backed off, have released. But the tissues cannot collapse because the energy is still exuding. So even if the muscles wanted to retrace back and collapse, they can't, because there's still a strong exuding of the energy. But reduce that energy where you can maintain it to a certain degree. Again, contrast, dead, drab, collapsed, energetically dull. Make everything open but tight, rigid, too yang. Don't try to change the tissues or relax the tissues, just let them go, but keep the energetic going. And then how much can you reduce the energetic and still keep that open shape, still keep the tissues nicely stretched and activated? You can reduce the energetic a little bit, where it's still enough that it's keeping the tissues activated. Again, let's go specifically to the shoulder joints and then go to other places in the body where it may have again collapsed, or maybe they're too tight and rigid and too much of that yang direction. So find the areas that are too yin, they've dimmed down, places that are too yang, too aggressively doing, and then adjust where you can allow those places to be self-sustaining or closer to self-sustaining. And that's the main process in the standard holding the tree position. So again, let's contrast to yin. This clearly is not it, both in terms of you being able to see it, I'm sure, but you'll feel this, especially when you have some activation, you know that the contrasting becomes glaringly obvious to you. So this is definitely not it. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. So, and we don't even have to tighten up anymore too much, just make it too yang. I'm radiating like a star that's about to explode. What was that saying? The brightest candle, the brightest light burns the quickest. So we're turning it on, maximum wattage, which is nice and wonderful, but we can't sustain it. So we carefully modulate that exuding, flowing, the radiation, but still enough to carry the tissues and buoy the joints open, but not any more than that. So eventually you get closer to that threshold where it's self-sustaining. Notice what you can release that's totally unnecessary tension or holding. Replace that with presence. Release more and more and more, but notice when you start to slide into the echelon of drab and dull, collapsed. Notice when you're moving towards a spectrum of holding, making the space muscularly. Notice when you're drifting in either direction, and replace it with radiant presence, active presence, and letting go of everything else. And then as you let the hands drift down to regular standing, don't let anything collapse. It's like you still have the same expansive energy as with the arms up and out. On the outside, physically, it might look like the arms are no longer up, but the energy has not changed. Replace tightness with presence. Replace collapsation with presence. Feel that open aliveness in the hands. Transfer that to other areas in the body. Take that same quality and feeling, especially in your hands, and before you start moving, stay with that feeling quality, kind of anchor that in your awareness and intention, so you keep that as you go into movement. So you're a collection of open, spacious joints. Including your lower back and sacrum. So the sacrum itself, that's gently opening this way and opening this way and opening this way. Everything is doing that. The lower vertebrae are opening. The upper vertebrae doing the same thing as the bones in your hands. That sacrum. The bones are opening away from each other because of your presence, not because of your efforting. The feet are doing what the hands are doing. They're opening. Abdomen releasing. Even the space between your ribs. They're opening not because you're trying to open them, but because you're just becoming energetically spacious. You're just not compacted anymore. It's like going from the earth to the moon, less gravity. So gravity is lessened. Gravity is lessened. You don't have to open up your body. It will open because it's less compacted. As you open energetically and in your feeling, this will release because you're not unconsciously holding and constricting and condensing. As things open and release, become active and expansive, they're released. They're freed. Again, what's very useful, a very good training methodology is really emphasize what we're working on, whatever it may be. Really work on it, emphasize it on the coming back, on the shift back. It just turns out that often it's the case, we're able to really capture and get a sense of these qualities and feelings and really focus on it, on the retracing, on the coming back. And then let that continue as much as possible going forward. And I believe that the reason for that is because whenever we go forward, that's the doing mode. That's the doing direction. Leaning, doing it. That's the efforting, that's the doing. I've got somewhere to go. We've got a mission to accomplish, to get there. Coming back, we don't have as much issues, unconscious patterning. Going forward, doing clicks in unconsciously. So we can really capitalize on that tendency. So coming back, we can really gather those feelings, absorb them, and then that extra amount of experience with that principle will inform the movement forward. Change and condition the movement forward. So take the movement back. It's a chance to really study and really absorb, assimilate feelings, and see if we can have that drift into the forward movement. Try some brush knees. Now that's a little bit more complicated movement. So see where you lose it and when you lose it. So slow it down in those, especially in those parts where you're losing it. You might even stop. For example, let's say I'm losing it. Oh, my shoulder's pulled in here. I'm starting to tighten up. I can actually pause here like I'm doing my standing. I can actually pause here and treat this as my standing posture. Hang out from the string, hang the hips, put presence in the shoulder joints, release. So this becomes my standing posture for a few moments. And then have the extra qualities I just regenerated, the regenerated qualities and feelings, have that start the movement again. I don't start the movement, have those regenerated qualities drive the movement. That's the engine. The principles are the engine. The feeling, the quality is the engine. So that's far more potent than moving and trying to get the principles, moving, trying to get the feeling. Just anchor yourself in the feeling. Be the ink blot paper. And the feeling or the principle is the ink. Hang out there until the ink saturates the paper. The ink saturated the blotting paper, and that's what's moving me. The saturation of the tissues with the feeling. That's what's moving me. So do not move for moving's sake. So I'm going to hang out here. I'm not going to move into cloud hands and then try to get it. This is my new standing posture. We have this, we have this, we have this. Well, anything can be a standing posture, any of the Tai Chi movements, anywhere in the Tai Chi movement. So I'm not going to go into cloud hands. I'm not going to move into cloud hands. This is my standing posture. I set up and allow as much of those feelings as I can and see if I can have myself move from the inside because of the presence, perhaps even because of the expansion of those qualities or the presence of those qualities. So I'll probably have my movement be quite slow and maybe smaller than usual. That's totally good. But eventually it may not be smaller. It takes that, becomes more and more saturated. The ink goes further and further into the blotting paper until the blotting paper is totally filled, totally saturated with the ink. So eventually the movement might be made very, very, very big because of the quality and the feelings, because it's saturating more and more into the paper, more and more through the body. Now, whatever move you're doing, see if you can find that stratosphere, that echelon where it's self-sustaining or close to self-sustaining. Here it's too much stretch, too much activation. Here's totally collapsed dead. Find that place in the middle there where it's self-sustaining or getting close to self-sustaining. And then when you get to the place where it's close to self-sustaining, you feel very buoyant, very light, you are supported. You feel very supported. It's like you're resting on a cloud or you're resting on a dinghy on the ocean and you're very buoyant. Any comments or questions? Okay, now come back to here. I'm not even really going to talk about standing posture. I just come back to the standing neutral. And before you go into, let's say, stationary cloud hands, before you go into it, fill the space with your presence. Fill the space with your feeling. And move that feeling. And have that be the reason why you're moving into what in this case could be cloud hands. but you're not going into cloud hands. You allow the feeling, turn on the feeling, activate the feeling. Energy is active, not tight, but very, very active. And then you're buoyed or pushed into the movement. And then the body stays always slightly behind the energetic movement, so it's always supported, always buoyed. The body is the sail, and it's being filled by that active energy. And that's why you're moving. You're not moving because you're moving. You've moved your energy, you've moved your feeling. One more time, come back to just neutral. Move the feeling, activate the energy, activate the space, give it a direction, and your body's being swept up. Now, it'll be really good if you have time to do a whole set with this quality and feeling. Release, release, release. Let the efforting be replaced by the energetic. Find the place where it's self-sustaining, where you're not over-efforting, not depleting yourself. There's an act of energy, an act of replenishment